Hello, everybody. It's The Spice Must Flow. I'm back again. And today I was going to discuss, we'll just say, certain, deep thoughts. This one is on the future and automation and Star Trek. Um, so I used to watch Star Trek The Next Generation. Well, who am I fooling? I still watch Star Trek The Next Generation. I'll probably be 85 years old watching Star Trek The Next Generation, right? And as I've gotten older, the show has gotten much more interesting to me just because so much of it I can't say I really agree with, right? At least in terms of what it advocates, right? There's aspects of it that I find ridiculous at this point because of now what I know about the world. But that being said, there are some interesting points, right, that are available in Trek to the world to see. And one of the most interesting parts of it was, if you think about it, Star Trek never really focused on the civilian world, right? See, in Trek was always about the military and exploration arm of what was called the United Federation of Planets, right? So you're talking about a universe, or a galaxy more accurately, a galaxy in which humans are one of a variety of species that have all come together um, in a grand alliance to go throughout the cosmos and settle worlds, live on planets in various places, that some of which can handle life already, others of which must be terraformed, okay, and explore the cosmos, find out what it is. And so they have a military wing called Starfleet, right? And the military wing is not so much a military wing as it is military and exploration. Most of the times, they hope it'll just be exploration, right? But every now and again, something happens, and they have to go out and do some fighting. And they in this organization, you have the command, you have the security services, you have engineers, scientists, and medical, right? And those five general job titles are basically what's going on in Trek. Um, and I always found it interesting that you don't have a lot of discussion over the economics of the world of Trek, but there are a few hints here and there. The biggest hint in The Next Generation is you have replicators, okay? And they don't explain them heavily in scientific terms, but for all intents and purposes, you have a machine that reassembles matter that is one thing and turns it into a different thing. So let's say you want a guitar. The replicator can make a guitar. Let's say you just want to have filet mignon. It will make you filet mignon. It'll create food for you. Okay, let's say you want to have, I don't know, skin cream of some sort, like some lotion or something. Um, it'll make that. Okay, there are some things that cannot be replicated, like a living organism can't. In it, there are various things they cannot replicate, but virtually anything that is not living, they can in fact replicate in the show. Um, you also have holograms which can be made in such a way that they are capable of moving things. They can have a physical presence and not just be a light projection. Okay. Um, Always a very interesting thing about the show. Okay, when you think about these two technologies and you imagine what you can do with those two technologies, okay, it starts to look like you don't need a lot of people working, right? The level of automation, you combine that with cheap, nearly costless energy, okay, and the problems of humanity are gone. Now, I was discussing this earlier with my boss at work, right? And he found it kind of, he basically is like, well, yeah, some point they'll probably be so automated, that, a lot of people won't have jobs. Yeah. I've talked to other people who basically have said to me, well, they think there will always be jobs for people. You'll never have, lotus eaters, as it were, right? But that, the jobs will change. They say, well, agricultural revolution happened, and yes, there weren't nearly as many jobs in agriculture, but we had jobs in industry, and life got better. And people are not wrong when they make that observation. That is what happened, but the jobs were different. The jobs in factories and mines and other places were very different than they ever had been before. So I kind of thought about this. See, that hint of the things you see in Trek in terms of technology. In one of the early episodes, there's a guy who has been in cold sleep, right? He suspended animation, right? And then they woke him up, and it was the 24th century, and this guy wants to call some people. He's like, well, I got to find out what happened to my investments and everything of that nature, right? And Picard's like, that doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about, right? And this guy's like, well, what do people do, right? He's like, you're in the military, but like, what do people actually do? Average everyday people, right? And Picard's like, people are no longer obsessed with material wealth, right? Picard says people are engineers and scientists and artists and musicians, right? And it's kind of funny, right? It's funny when you look at Star Trek. So what ultimately is it? Yes, people are those things, and people are also colonists, okay, and people are also terraforming planets, and people are in the in Starfleet, in that world, okay. But here's the interesting thing: the assumption, it seems, is that virtually everybody in that world is smart. That seems to be exactly the way that it works in that world. Everybody's relatively smart. And I thought to myself, that would be nice to think that. But what would the world actually be like? You see, right now we're moving into a world of greater automation. There are people that I know who make good money simply taking a washer and a bolt and putting it into a widget and bolting it together and then sending it on down the line. That's their whole job. They do this for between 8 and 12 hours a day. 4 or 5 days out of the week, right? There's a lot of honor in that job. I would never put that down. I don't really put down any job per se, right? Every job is important to some extent or another, right? But what happens when you build a robot that's capable of doing that job? I haven't ever worked on an assembly line myself, but I have worked in fabrication before. I'm going to trade school to get certifications to do stuff I've already done without a certification before, right? And in fabrication, we had welding robots. And when these welding robots screwed up, we had to fix it. We also had to make sure the computers ran correctly and run the operation sequencing and analyze what was going on, right? What happens when you build robots that can do all of that stuff? See, already, the only reason we were there is for when the robots screwed up, which they did fairly often, right? But let's say the robots never really did that, and there was some sort of device that could pull the piece out of the out of the cell where the robots were doing this job, and just move them down through the line, continually getting whatever it has to be, whatever had to be done. What would happen? What would happen if you had a system that was set up like that? You'd only have to have a handful of people in that entire factory, because robots would do virtually everything necessary. We're coming up on that point. It is going to come. That day will arrive. I don't think it'll arrive for another 20 years or longer, but we'll get there. And here's the thing. I know people, and most of the people that I've known are not going to be engineers or scientists, and they're not going to be artists, and they're not going to be musicians. Most people, if you even set up a world not like Trek, where hardly anybody has to work, right? Where maybe 85-90% of humanity can just do nothing and be totally cool with it. What if we just get to a point where only 60% of people have to work? Just think about that for a second. What if only 60% of people have to work? The reason why I ask this is what's that extra 40% going to do? The answer to that question is they're going to be jacking off in virtual reality or fucking a sex bot. They will be smoking weed all day long. And if they're really messed up, they'll be smoking crack or smoking meth all day long. Okay? There'll be a large number of people who, they might be great folks. They might just simply focus on a family that they have, right? They're intelligent. They will read things. They will be entertained in their life, much like somebody who inherited a large fortune or something, right? But those folks, maybe they would have been a skilled, like I'm describing, for instance, probably myself, right? I don't really have the mathematical chops to be an engineer. I damn sure don't have the mathematical chops to be a rocket scientist. And I can admit that about myself. Okay? But I do certainly have the skills to be a skilled technician. That's effectively what I have been in the past. That's what I'm in school to do, is to be a skilled technician. To either go to a place in terms of a structured environment of a factory, or to go to places and do construction, okay, in a variety of environments, okay, welding, that's what it is, welding, okay, school to weld, that's what it is, okay. I go to a place and weld something outside of the structured environment of a factory. Okay, but I regardless of which of those factors we're talking about, regardless of which of those situations, what happens when even a skilled trade is something a computer and a robot do, right? It's possible I might be able to move into the technician level of looking after the robots. I probably could pull that off, because if I really had wanted to be really bored with life, I probably could have been programming, doing computer programming or network security or something. I just have no interest in doing that, but I probably could. The question, though, what about the folks who work at a factory, for instance, and they screw the washer and the bolt together and they make a car, let's say, or they make a large industrial machine, or they make an air conditioner or something, whatever have you. And they're not smart enough to do a skilled trade. And they're damn sure not smart enough to be an engineer. They can't even pull off learning how to do a skilled trade. What happens to those people? What happens to their lives? I don't know. What I do know is this. If you look at the Marxist interpretation of history, and when I say that, I don't mean Marxist from a communist standpoint. What I mean is Marxist from the sociological viewpoint. Marx had this belief that conflicts occur between people because of a lack of material goods. Marx believed that, outside of a few people that were, totally insane, basically, right? You wouldn't have conflict if everybody just had material goods. And I contend that that's like patently false. In fact, not only is that patently false, that should be obvious just simply from a view of human history, that people have gotten into all sorts of conflicts historically over things that had nothing at all to do with material resources, or into conflicts where material resources were one of only a bunch of reasons why people got into conflicts. And that's the thing. I do believe that in a lot of ways, if you do go to work, you have less of an opportunity or less of a possibility that you can get in a dust-up with people, because at least you are working towards some sort of common goal. When you are working, what happens when you have a whole bunch of lotus eaters? Not even bad folks. They just, you live in a world where there's only so many things to do, and there's only really the smartest people can potentially have a job. And everyone else, it isn't like everyone else is starving. Everyone else can get everything at very low cost to no cost at all, right? What happens? I don't know. But I kind of wonder about your thoughts. What do you think would happen? At any rate, though, this is Spice Must Flow signing out. And once again, furthermore, I consider Islam must be destroyed.